I was fresh out of the shower, still in my underwear, when I heard giggles in my living room. My stomach dropped. I live on 40 acres of farmland, no neighbors close by, so when I stepped out, I expected to see my dogs. Instead, a 4-year-old boy I had never seen was sprinting across my kitchen, tugging open drawers and playing with my pets like he owned the place. No knock, no parents, no explanation, just a stranger's child inside my locked-up home. And that terrifying intrusion was only the first time. What would you do if someone else's kid kept breaking into your house? Again and again. I used to brag that life on our little farmhouse property was boring in the best way. My husband and I built a routine that was equal parts work and peace. Him tinkering with the tractors, me fussing with the dogs or reorganizing my makeup room. Evenings spent with the wood stove humming. The nearest neighbor was a third of a mile away. Our world was quiet. So quiet that the sudden sound of laughter inside my living room felt like a gunshot. First I froze. The only living things in my house were supposed to be my 3 small dogs. Their nails make tiny clicks when they cross the floor. But this sound, light, rapid, almost musical, wasn't them. My heart climbed into my throat as I pulled on pants and opened the bedroom door. There he was. A boy, no older than 4, racing barefoot from my kitchen to my couch, his little hands pulling at my curtains and patting my dogs like they were his own. He didn't even look at me. My dogs barked once, then wagged, delighted to have a new playmate. My brain scrambled between terror and disbelief. Who was he? Where were his parents? How did he get through my locked gate, let alone my front door? I tried speaking gently, asking his name, asking where his mom or dad was. Nothing. He didn't even acknowledge me. Just kept playing, opening the fridge, bouncing on the cushions. Every second that ticked by, my panic twisted tighter. I live off a county road where trucks speed by at 70 miles an hour. For a child to wander this far alone was unthinkable. Then, just as suddenly as he arrived, he left. He slipped out my front door, through the gate, and vanished behind the side of the house. I ran to the porch, scanning the road, scanning the fields, praying I wouldn't hear screeching brakes. A minute later, a girl, maybe 10, came running down from the direction of the neighbor's property, shouting, "Where is he?" Her face was flushed, frantic. I saw him go around back. I yelled, pointing, still half in shock. She barely nodded, disappeared behind the house, and a few moments later I saw her dragging the boy toward the dirt road. Over her shoulder, a quick sorry. And that was it. No parent. No explanation. No apology. My hands were shaking when I FaceTimed my husband. He tried to calm me down, told me it was probably just a fluke. A bored kid who slipped away while the family was distracted. But the unease stayed with me like a shadow. In that moment I thought, this was insane, but surely it would never happen again. I was wrong. Everything was about to change. The first time it happened, I kept telling myself it had to be some bizarre one-off mistake. Kids wander, right? But deep down I knew this was different. I had just finished a shower and was in the middle of painting my nails when I heard the noise. The kind of sound that doesn't belong in an empty house. Light footsteps, something clattering against the kitchen counter. My blood ran cold. I live in the country on a property so spread out you can't hear your neighbors sneeze, let alone have someone slip inside without you noticing. I grabbed my phone, hit FaceTime and called my husband. If someone was breaking in, I wanted a witness. On the screen he tried to calm me down, but when I whispered, "There's someone in the house," I saw his face drain of color. I stepped out of the bedroom and there he was. A tiny boy, maybe 4 years old, sprinting in circles around my dogs. My first thought wasn't even logical, it was pure shock. I thought maybe my brain had broken from the heat, that I was hallucinating. Because how else could a preschooler just appear in my locked-up home? He didn't acknowledge me at all. Didn't stop, didn't explain. He was tugging open drawers, tossing couch cushions, squealing as my dogs barked and spun with excitement. I tried asking his name, where he lived, if his parents were nearby. He ignored every word like I was invisible. Minutes crawled by. Then, just as quickly as he had arrived, he bolted. He slipped out the front door, through the gate, and vanished around the side of the house. I rushed outside, scanning for headlights, terrified he'd dart toward the county road where semis barreled past. That's when a girl, maybe 10, came running from down the road, panting, eyes wide. "Where is he?" she shouted. I pointed around back, my voice cracking. She barely stopped, just dashed off, and a moment later I saw her pulling him away by the wrist. Over her shoulder a tossed-off sorry. Sharp, dismissive, already fading as she disappeared toward the neighbor's property. And then I was standing alone again, door wide open, dogs barking at the empty road. My hands were trembling when I finally hung up the call. My husband said the words I wanted to believe. It was an accident. It won't happen again. But the unease never left me. And a year later when it happened again it was so much worse. For months after that first incident, I jumped at every noise. The memory of that child sprinting through my living room stuck like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Still, time passed. My husband told me I was overthinking. That it was just one chaotic afternoon when the neighbors lost track of their kid. And for a while nothing happened. The gate stayed closed, the camera showed only our dogs, and I almost convinced myself to let it go. Almost. Then, about a year later, my phone rang at work. It was my husband. His voice was clipped, tense. He's back. He's in the house right now. My stomach flipped. What do you mean, in the house? He crawled through the dog door. I thought he was joking, but then he said the words that made my knees buckle. I called the cops. Later, I saw the footage myself. The boy, now maybe 5 or 6, pushed open our front gate like he'd done it 100 times before. My dogs barked furiously at him, tails up, alert. He tried the front door, found it locked, knocked once and then paused. For a few seconds he just stood there thinking. And then without hesitation, he bent down and squeezed through the dog door. He didn't creep in like he was scared. He strutted like he knew he belonged. He opened the flap again so the dogs could follow, slipped off his shoes, jumped on the couch, grabbed the remote and turned on the TV. Then he raided our fruit basket, peeled an orange, and slurped an ice pop from our freezer like it was his after-school snack. For 15 minutes he made himself at home in my living room, unsupervised, unfazed, and completely unbothered that he was trespassing. By the time the police arrived, he had crawled back out through the dog door. They caught him just outside, asked his name, and told him firmly that this wasn't his house. Minutes later, a car pulled into our driveway. His parents. They spoke to the officers, nodded, and left with their son. By the time my husband made it home, everyone was gone, as if it had never happened. The police shrugged, saying it was just a kid being a kid. But I couldn't shake the dread. If he could get in twice, once through the front door, once through the dog door, what would stop him next time? A window? The back porch? And then a week later the phone rang again. It was his parents. Their voices were tight, nervous. Do you know if he's in your house again? We can't find him. When the parents called asking if their son was in my house again, I felt my skin crawl. The casual tone in their voices, like it was normal for their 6-year-old to disappear into strangers' homes, made me furious. My husband and I pulled up our cameras immediately. Nothing. No small shadow crawling through the dog door this time. No little sneakers by the couch. Still, I couldn't calm down. Because that call meant one thing. They had no idea where their child was. Not for 5 minutes, not for 10, but for long enough to panic and start dialing neighbors. Out here, that's practically life or death. We live right off a county road where cars fly past at 70 miles an hour. A wandering kid could vanish forever in seconds. I remember standing in my kitchen that night, staring at the silent footage from our cameras, my hands shaking. My husband tried to reassure me. At least he didn't come here this time. But that wasn't comforting, it was worse. If he wasn't with us, then where was he? That's when the thought hit me like a punch. I was more aware of this child's whereabouts than his own parents. I started replaying everything in my head, the details I had brushed aside. The way he'd navigated my gate like he'd done it before. How he had slipped his shoes off and settled on my couch, like it wasn't his first time. The way the girl had come sprinting that first day, already knowing exactly where to look. This wasn't random. This was a pattern. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Because it wasn't just the boy. It was their dogs breaking onto our property, killing our chickens, mauling baby sheep. It was their horses escaping their enclosure to eat our hay. It was the endless cycle of their neglect spilling onto our lives. I realized then, it wasn't just about privacy anymore. It was liability. If that boy tripped over a tool in our garage or got bitten by one of our animals, we would be the ones blamed. If he left a gate open and my dogs ran into the road, it would be our tragedy to live with. That night I told my husband, next time I'm not just calling the cops. I'm calling CPS. Because this wasn't a funny story about a mischievous kid anymore. It was neglect. It was dangerous. And it was only a matter of time before something truly terrible happened. The boy sneaking into our house was only one piece of a much bigger problem, though it took me a while to connect the dots. At first, I thought it was just about a child being left unsupervised. But the more I looked back at our neighbor history, the more I realized neglect wasn't the exception for this family, it was the rule. It started with their horses, massive animals breaking free from their enclosure, and wandering onto our fields to chew through our hay. It wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. If one spooked near the county road, it could cause a fatal crash. When my husband confronted them, they shrugged, promised to fix the fence, and did nothing. Then came the dogs. Huge, untrained, and aggressive. More than once, we caught them on camera chasing our sheep, tearing through our chicken coop. We buried baby lambs because of them. We replaced hens because of them. Each time we called, we texted, we demanded action. Each time the response was the same half-hearted "sorry, we'll tie them up." And yet, they always got loose again. Now add a child to that mix. A child so desperate to escape his own house that he crawls through a stranger's dog door and makes himself at home. A child whose parents don't notice he's gone until they're dialing around the neighborhood. A child who, by his own father's admission, had already learned how to sneak out of his bedroom window. The picture was clear. They didn't control their animals and they didn't control their kid. They lived in chaos and everyone around them was forced to carry the risk. I wanted to believe it wasn't malicious. Maybe they were overwhelmed, maybe they were tired, maybe parenting and farming had stretched them too thin. But then I remembered the boy spitting at his father when told to apologize, the girl shouting with more panic than any adult ever showed, the way no one, not once, came to our door to make things right. No. This wasn't just tired parents doing their best. This was carelessness, plain and simple. And people like that don't suddenly wake up and change because you asked nicely. That night, staring at the footage again, I said out loud what had been building for months. If they won't protect their own child, then someone else has to step in. My husband looked at me silent because he knew exactly what I meant. The next time that boy crossed our property line, I wasn't just going to call the cops. I was going to make it official. CPS reports, everything. Because one way or another, this couldn't continue. And then, only days later, I learned just how far things could spiral when parents like that stopped caring. After the police visit, my husband decided to walk down to the neighbor's house himself. I was furious he didn't wait for me, but he thought a face-to-face talk might finally settle things. When he came back, he told me the father had actually apologized. Said the boy had been grounded, that he'd snuck out through his bedroom window, and that he just loved our dogs too much to stay away. For a brief moment I let myself exhale. Maybe this was it. Maybe embarrassment plus a warning from the cops would snap them into reality. Maybe they'd finally keep their son safe and their chaos contained. The father even made the boy stand there and apologize, though that ended with the child spitting at him and storming off. Still, it was something. At least they seemed to acknowledge the problem existed. For the next week, everything was calm. No shadows on the cameras, no little sneakers in my living room, no horses trampling my hay. My husband and I even joked about how quiet it felt, like maybe we'd finally turned a corner. I kept my phone close, but the silence was almost enough to make me believe it was over. Then came the phone call. It was a Wednesday afternoon. My husband and I were both at work when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I picked up and my heart sank at the voice on the other end. It was the boy's mother. "Hi," she said casually, almost sheepishly. Do you know if child's name is at your house again? We can't find him." The words made me go cold. Again. She didn't sound terrified or frantic, or even particularly urgent. She sounded resigned. Like losing track of her son for half an hour and assuming he'd crawled into someone else's house was completely normal. My husband immediately pulled up the camera feeds. Nothing. The yard was empty, the living room quiet. But my hands still shook as I scanned every corner, every frame. Because whether or not he was with us, the truth was clear. They didn't know where their child was. They never knew. For a week, I had let myself believe things were getting better. That the nightmare was ending. But in that moment, listening to his mother's flat, careless tone, I realized the nightmare hadn't ended at all. It was just getting started. After that phone call, something inside me snapped. I stopped giving the parents the benefit of the doubt. Their tone that day, flat, casual, as if their missing child was nothing more than a misplaced shoe, made me realize they weren't going to change. Not with apologies. Not with police warnings. Not ever. So I tightened security. We put a lock on our gate. I researched special collars and chip-activated dog doors so my pets could come and go while the boy couldn't. It wasn't cheap, but I kept telling myself it was better than waking up to find him raiding my fridge again. Or worse, finding him hurt on my property. But the more I tried to secure my world, the more cracks showed. Because it wasn't just the child. Their animals started breaking loose again. First, their horses stomping through our hay fields, eating what we had worked all season to bail. Then their dogs, big, aggressive ones, back on our cameras charging across the property line. One afternoon, my husband came home to find feathers scattered across the yard and 2 chickens dead. Another time we buried a lamb. Each incident chipped away at my patience, until frustration turned into raw fury. It felt like we were living in constant defense mode, securing gates, repairing fences, double-checking cameras, while they lived without consequence, dumping their problems onto everyone else. And still the boy loomed in my mind. Every time I came home, I half expected to find him sitting on my couch with a popsicle. Every time I left for work, I worried what he might get into while we were gone. My husband brushed it off, but my stomach stayed knotted day after day. Then came the night that sealed it. I walked into the kitchen and froze. On the table, right where my husband had left it after lighting the wood stove earlier, sat the propane torch we kept for kindling. To us it was a normal tool. But to a curious 6-year-old it could be a death sentence. The thought hit me like ice water. What if he had come in that day? What if he'd found it, pulled the trigger, set the house on fire, or worse, himself? That was the moment I knew it wasn't just about boundaries anymore. It was about survival. His, ours, and everything we'd built here. And the next time he showed up on our property, I wasn't going to wait for apologies or excuses. I was going to make it official. It happened on a Saturday morning, when the air was heavy and still, and I was finally letting myself enjoy a cup of coffee on the porch. I heard the dogs bark, not their normal playful bark but sharp, frantic. I pulled up the camera on my phone, and my blood ran cold. There he was again, the boy, standing at my gate, fumbling with the latch like he'd practiced it 100 times. Seconds later he was on my property, heading straight for the dog door. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to watch this play out again. I wasn't going to wait for the sorries that never came. I dialed the police, my voice shaking but firm. He's here. Again. You need to send someone now. Through the camera I saw him bend down, ready to crawl inside. I raced to the door, yanked it open before he could slip through, and blocked the entrance with my body. You can't come in here, I said, my voice sharper than I'd ever used with a child. This is not your house. He looked up at me wide-eyed, not frightened but annoyed, like I'd interrupted his game. For a second we just stared at each other, me shaking with adrenaline, him with juice-stained lips and bare feet on my porch. Then the sirens. A patrol car pulled into my driveway, tires spitting gravel. The boy turned, startled, as 2 officers stepped out. Moments later a second car arrived. His parents, faces pale, scrambling to explain. The officers didn't brush it off this time. They'd seen the footage I'd sent ahead, the timestamps, the pattern. They knew this wasn't kids being kids. This was trespassing, this was neglect, and it was dangerous. One officer knelt down to the boy, speaking firmly but gently. You cannot do this. You are not safe here. The other pulled his parents aside, their voices low and tense. I stood there, arms crossed, shaking but unyielding. For the first time I didn't feel like the crazy neighbor overreacting. I felt like someone finally saw what I'd been screaming into the void for months. This wasn't my responsibility. It was theirs. When the officers left, they promised a report would be filed. CPS would be notified. There would be follow-up accountability. The boy's parents avoided my eyes, muttering something about keeping him inside, about new locks on his windows. But it was too late for apologies. As their car pulled away, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Relief mixed with fury, exhaustion tangled with vindication. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time, the weight wasn't mine alone to carry. 'Cause now it was official. Since that Saturday, things have been different. The boy hasn't shown up again. Not at my gate, not on my cameras, not on my porch. Whether it's because the police filed the report or because CPS stepped in, I'll never know. But I finally feel like I can breathe in my own home again. I've tightened security anyway. A lock on the gate. A dog door that only opens with special collars. Cameras in every corner of the property. Some people might say it's overkill, but after living months on edge, it feels less like paranoia and more like peace of mind. And yet, the unease never fully leaves. Because I keep replaying the bigger picture in my head. It wasn't just a kid sneaking into my house. It was the pattern of neglect all around him. Animals left to starve, fences left to rot, children left to wander. For too long I told myself it wasn't my business. But the truth is, when someone else refuses to take responsibility, their chaos becomes everyone's problem. I didn't want to be the neighbor who called CPS. I didn't want to be the person dialing the police over and over. But sometimes the line between minding your own business and protecting yourself isn't a line at all. It's a crossroads. And you have to choose. I chose to act. Not because I hate that little boy, if anything I pity him. But because one day, if someone didn't, we'd all be standing in front of something far worse than trespassing. So now I wonder, did I overreact? Or did I do the only thing anyone could have done in my shoes? What would you have done if a stranger's child kept breaking into your home?